In our headlines on this Tuesday afternoon, August 27th, here in South Korea. The Yoon administration proposes a budget bill of 677.4 trillion won, about $509.5 billion for next year, a 3.2% rise on year, with tangible support for the vulnerable. And in the U.S., Wall Street closes trade on Monday mixed, with the Dow Jones soaring to a new high and the Nasdaq losing much ground, while global oil prices race higher amid mounting hostilities in the Middle East. Elsewhere, on the international front, Russia stages attacks on some 15 Ukrainian energy facilities overnight, cutting essential civilian electricity and water supplies in its latest air raid against Ukraine. The government here has proposed a budget of some 677.4 trillion won, about $509.5 billion for next year. According to Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok earlier, on this Tuesday, the budget will seek to raise basic living allowance for low-income households, expand housing supply, and bolster financial support for small businesses. He underscored that vulnerable groups have yet to experience the impact of the latest economic rebound in their daily lives. The budget proposal for next year marks an annual increase of 3.2% and is larger than the previous expansion of 2.8%. In related news, President Yoon Suk-yeol says the latest budget proposal has slashed 24 trillion won, about $18 billion in government spending, by reassessing project feasibility to allow for reallocation to essential tasks. To take a listen.
이러한 건전 재정과 협업의 기반 위에 맞춤형 약자 복지의 확충, 경제 활력의 확산, 미래를 대비하는 경제 체질 개선, 안전한 사회 및 글로벌 중추 외교 등 4대 분야를 집중적으로 지원할 것입니다.
Speaking at a cabinet meeting earlier on this Tuesday morning, President Yoon approved the budget bill as his administration remains committed to a prudent fiscal policy as it seeks to ease its fiscal deficit. On the economic front, President Yoon pointed out that next year's budget seeks greater spending on R&D in high-tech sectors such as semiconductors and artificial intelligence. On the social front, the proposal pledges support for couples looking to start families and for small business owners with hefty loans. The budget bill now needs parliamentary approval. Across the border, North Korea unveiled new suicide attack drones this past weekend, and pundits here believe the show of strength is related to the regime's military pact with Russia. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung has more.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un supervised a performance test of so-called suicide drones on Saturday and called for the development of more to boost war readiness. According to state media on Monday, Kim oversaw the test of the new exploding drones, which are made to precisely destroy preset enemy targets on the ground and in the sea. Kim emphasized the need to develop different types of drones and improve combat capabilities for war operations. He also highlighted the importance of incorporating artificial intelligence technology when developing drones. Of the two drones revealed in the photographs, one resembles Russia's Lancet 3, which has had significant success in targeting Ukrainian forces. South Korea is looking into the possibility of Pyongyang receiving help from Moscow.
We are aware that Russia gave some drones to North Korea as gifts. We need to analyze various aspects, including whether North Korea made modifications to improve their performance.
One expert says the test could have been aimed at boasting that the regime is capable of producing and supplying drones to Russia.
Russia is currently very dependent on drones in the war against Ukraine. So if North Korea develops and now produces them, I believe it will be meaningful in the long term with regard to supplying weapons to Russia.
The expert also pointed out that the North's drones could be beneficial to the regime, as they are harder to detect and strike due to their small size and low-altitude flight maneuvers. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korea's intelligence authorities have cast doubt on North Korea's ability to sufficiently supply itself with missiles amid the regime's earlier announcement of deploying 250 ballistic missile launchers to the border. Our political correspondent Lee Si-hoo has details.
Regarding North Korea's recent claim that it's equipped itself with 250 new tactical ballistic missile launchers, South Korea's intelligence agency believes that the missiles, if launched, could reach as far as Chungcheongdo province, having a possible range of 110 kilometers. But as to whether Pyongyang can actually supply itself with the missiles, South Korea has its doubts. This is according to a National Intelligence Service report made to the National Assembly Intelligence Committee on Monday. The vice chairman of the committee, lawmakers Lee Seung-kwon and Park Sun-won, following their meeting with the NIS, told reporters that there are concerns about the launcher's potential frontline placement and operation, and that there is pressure to prepare for defense. But the NIS also believes that the regime's ongoing supply of weapons to Russia could make it difficult to meet its own demand for missiles. North Korean state media reported earlier this month that Pyongyang plans to deploy hundreds of new missile vehicles called transporter erector launchers to its border with South Korea. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
Also here in the southern part of the peninsula, Seoul and Washington are staging live fire ad drills as part of their 11-day annual Ilchi Freedom Shield that ends later this week. The drills are underway in waters of South Korea's western coast. They involve some 60 military planes with the focus on bolstering response capabilities against enemy provocations that occur simultaneously in the air and on the ground. Russia staged air assaults on some 15 Ukrainian energy facilities overnight, cutting essential civilian electricity and water supplies. Our An Sung-jin has the latest.
Russia launched drones and missiles across Ukraine on Monday in what may be its biggest air attack so far. Ukraine's air forces say more than 200 Russian drones and missiles were used in the attack. That will be more than 150 used in Russia's previous largest air attacks last December. The State Emergency Service of Ukraine have stated that at least 7 people were killed in Monday's missile and drone attacks, and more than 40 were injured.
Each such strike reminds us again and again of the need for long-range capabilities, the necessity to provide our defense forces with sufficient long-range weapons, capable of destroying terrorists precisely where they launch their attacks from.
Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal stated that Russia targeted around 15 energy facilities overnight, leading to an emergency blackout. The mayor of Kyiv said all electricity and water supplies were cut off due to these power outages. Air raid alerts were issued across the country.
I would like to see a response to Moscow so that they will feel what we feel. I want to provide us more and allow us to use long-range missiles inside Russia so that they will feel the horror we feel.
Russian authorities stated that they targeted Ukrainian gas and power supplies, arguing that this infrastructure is used to support Ukrainian missile and drone production. The Ukraine Air Force claimed that it shot down 102 of the 127 missiles and 99 out of the 109 drones. Ukraine has further asked for help from the West.
This is the optimal counterterrorism tactic that every one of our partners, from whom we expect decisions and long-range capabilities, would have the right to employ and would certainly use for their own defense.
Meanwhile, the International Atomic Energy Agency is set to visit the Kursk region of Russia on Tuesday local time to conduct an on-site inspection, as Russia has claimed that Ukraine attacked the Kursk nuclear power plant with drones, which Ukraine has denied. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., Wall Street closed trade on Monday mixed, with the Dow Jones soaring to a fresh high and the Nasdaq losing much ground. Oil prices, meanwhile, raced higher amid mounting tensions in the Middle East. Our Lee Seung-jae has the numbers.
After falling more than 1,000 points in a single day on August 5th, the Dow Jones Industrial Average recovered to reach a fresh record high at the end of Monday's trading session. The Dow Jones rose 65.44 points, or 0.16% from the previous trading session, to close at a new record high of 41,240.52. The index recorded its previous high back on July 17th. The positive momentum on Wall Street comes on the back of expectations of a rate cut by the U.S. Federal Reserve next month, with some economists even predicting a 50 basis point cut. However, the tech-heavy Nasdaq fell nearly 1% on Monday due to profit-taking in semiconductor stocks. The index fell more than 150 points on the day, with Nvidia falling 2.25%. With the AI giant's Q2 earnings being announced next week, investors are selling to profit from gains, following a rebound of nearly 30% from its recent low on August 5th. Meanwhile, global oil prices soared on Monday amid geopolitical risks in the Middle East, including the recent clash between Israel and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. Brent crude futures for October delivery on the Intercontinental Exchange closed above $81 a barrel, up more than 3% from the previous trading session. On the New York Mercantile Exchange, the West Texas Intermediate futures for October delivery closed above $77, up 3.5% from the previous session's close. The surge in global oil prices also come as oil fields in eastern Libya will be closed, with production and exports halted. Authorities cited unspecified protests and pressures for the pause, as the eastern oil fields account for nearly all of the country's oil productions. 이승재, Arirang News.
Hyundai Motors plans to start EV production at its plant in Georgia within this year may be looking at a potential huddle. As media reports claim, U.S. authorities are poised to reassess the impact of the plant's operations on the region's water supplies. Our Yoon explains.
The Associated Press reported on Monday that a U.S. federal agency will be reassessing its environmental permit for South Korean firm Hyundai Motors' electric vehicle plant in Georgia. This comes after a conservation group, the Army Corps of Engineers, claimed that the plant's potential impact on the local water supply was not properly examined by regulators. The conservationists stated in a letter on Friday that the project's permit application in 2022 never mentioned the amount of water Hyundai would be pulling, up to 25 million liters per day, from a local underground aquifer, which is a major source of drinking water in the area. The letter said that the project would have negligible impacts on municipal and private water supplies. Hyundai Motors' $7.6 billion plant, designated to produce electric vehicles and the batteries that power them, has been pushing to start production at the plant located in Bryan County, west of Savannah, before the end of the year. And it was earlier in 2024 that further details of the plant's needs came out as the Georgia Environmental Protection Division considered a proposal for 4 new wells to supply water to the auto factory. While it is not known how long the additional review might take, the Army Corps has stated that the permit is currently still valid, and they have not asked for work on the Hyundai Motor Factory to stop, reiterating that their intention is not to delay or disrupt any construction at the plant site. Hyundai Motor Group Metaplant America said in a statement Monday that it will assist as needed to ensure that Army Corps gets the information it needs. And one of the local agencies that worked with state officials to bring Hyundai to Georgia said the information requested is expected to be submitted within 10 days, reaffirming that the reevaluation shouldn't cause any holdup to the project. 이은진, Arirang News.
Staying in North America, starting October, all electric vehicles shipped to Canada from China, including those of Tesla, will face a 100% tariff. Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryun covers this latest decision.
Canada has announced that it will be applying a tariff on imports of Chinese-made electric vehicles over what it says is an unfair advantage for China in the global market. The announcement came on Monday following a meeting between U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau the day before.
We're listening to automakers, we're listening to workers. Shortly, we will be introducing a 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles and a 25% tariff on Chinese steel and aluminum.
These new tariffs match the levies imposed by the Biden administration and come amid mounting trade tensions between China and countries in the Western Hemisphere. Canada's switch-up in automotive policy to protect domestic car production starts on October 1st, and duties will apply to all EVs imported from China. This includes those made by Tesla, and the announcement resulting in shares dropping by 3%. China is Canada's second largest trading partner, and auto shipments from China surged nearly fivefold year-on-year in 2023 as a result of Tesla's EVs. In a similar case with the European Union, the EU lowered its tariff rate for Tesla in comparison to its rates for other Chinese EV imports. Other than Tesla, leading Chinese EV maker BYD has been trying to enter the Canadian market, establishing a Canadian corporate entity and filing a notice saying that it plans to sell passenger cars in Canada as early as next year. BYD currently sells electric buses in Canada and the US and sells EVs and hybrid cars in Mexico and other Latin American countries. Due to concerns that Chinese automakers could bypass trade restrictions by entering the American market through Mexico, the US is considering ways to block this from happening. The new Chinese EV tariff in the United States, which raises the rate from 25% to 100%, is due to go live from the end of August, while the European Union is set to impose additional tariffs starting in November. 문혜련, Arirang News.
In other news, a Korean musical promoting universal values is making waves on global cultural stages. Our Choi Soo-young shares its story.
The world is being captivated by the Korean musical Ari, the Spirit of Korea. It reinterprets the story of Arirang, a 600-year-old Korean folk song originating from Jong-un County in Gangwon Province. It tells the story of a carpenter Shin Ki-mok who leaves his hometown and family to sail to the capital city Hanyang to rebuild Gyeongbokgung Palace. Ari Arari was created by Jongsun-gun County Office as part of cultural events for the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. Over the past 7 years, it has gained popularity, being showcased at various festivals worldwide.
We created cultural content using Johnson, Arirang to preserve Johnsun-gun County's unique identity, while adapting it to modern trends with universal themes like love, family, and home.
The musical was officially invited to one of the most prestigious arts and culture festivals in the United Kingdom, the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, from August 1st to 25th, alongside 3,800 other productions. Director Yoon Jong-un said that he focused more on music than on language, aiming for everyone to experience the performance through all 5 senses with the Korean essence.
We performed a total of 23 times, and the local response was incredibly enthusiastic. Even though most of the audience were foreigners, they laughed and enjoyed it together. And as they left the venue, many of them were humming the melody of Arirang.
Last year, Ari Arari won the Best Fiscal Theatre Award at the Adelaide Fringe Festival in Australia. Even a foreign tourist who first saw Ari Arari there later visited Jongsun-gun and then went to this year's Edinburgh Festival specifically to see the performance again and meet the actors, which moved them to tears. Yoon also expressed hope that Ari Arari would make Koreans living abroad feel even prouder of their heritage.
In the early 1900s, some Koreans were forcibly relocated to Central Asia or left the Korean peninsula. We call this path the Arirang Road. Just like the Silk Road, Koreans have spread worldwide. Back then, it was a path of suffering. But now, through our performance, we dream of turning it into a path of joy.
He hopes that people worldwide will visit Jongsun at least once to experience Ari Arari. Choi Soo-young, Arirang News.
Let's move on to the world now. Starting off in Pakistan, officials confirmed on Monday local time that at least 73 people have been killed in a wave of separatist militant attacks and military counter-operations in Balochistan province. Insurgents targeted police stations, railway lines, and highways. Pakistan's military reported that following one of the attacks, 14 soldiers and police officers, as well as 21 militants, died in fighting on a major highway in the Lasbela district. Baluchistan's chief minister, Sarfraz Bugti, confirmed that 38 civilians were also killed, including 23 passengers who were shot, with their vehicles set ablaze. The Baluch Liberation Army took responsibility for this and other attacks, including a suicide bombing on a parliamentary base involving 4 attackers, though authorities have yet to confirm all details. The BLA is one of several insurgent groups fighting for independence from Pakistan. It accuses the central government of exploiting the province's resources. The group also calls for the expulsion of China from Baluchistan. In France, right-wing leaders Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella met with President Emmanuel Macron on Monday, as Macron continues meetings to find a new prime minister. Bardella, head of the National Rally Party, told Macron that choosing a prime minister from the left-wing coalition would be a danger to public order and the economy. Le Pen has described the current political situation as chaos, saying that there is no easy solution to the crisis. The challenge for the new Prime Minister of France will be securing parliamentary approval for critical reforms, including the 2025 budget amid pressure from the European Commission, and bond markets to reduce France's deficit. Iran's Major General Mohammad Bagheri of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has said that the revenge for the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh is, quote, certain. Speaking at a ceremony for the armed forces in Tehran on Monday, Bagheri stated that Iran will determine how and when to respond to the assassination on July 31st, which it blames on Israel. Iran's Revolutionary Guards had previously confirmed that Haniyeh was killed in Tehran by a short-range projectile. A cake wasn't enough for 102-year-old British woman Manette Bailey, who decided to celebrate her birthday by jumping out of a plane. The skydive over Suffolk was undertaken to raise money for charity, and Bailey now becomes the oldest skydiver in Britain. This is not her first daredevil experience. When she turned 100, she drove a racing car at 209 kilometers per hour. Walter Lee, Arirang News.
Good job, how was that?
Good afternoon. We can certainly feel the intense heat has died down. Heat warnings have been downgraded to advisories in many parts, but it continues to be hotter than usual, with heat wave alerts remaining in place across much of Korea. Now, the coolest parts should be East Coast regions with easterly winds, but those winds will also bring rain to the East Coast areas and Jeju Island, where they could see up to 80 millimeters of showers until Thursday. Meanwhile, passing rain of 5 to 40 millimeters is in the forecast today. It could lash down 20 millimeters an hour along with thunderstorms, so please keep an umbrella handy. Checking on today's highs now, Seoul and Daejeon should be as hot as yesterday, getting up to 32 degrees. Daegu should be hotter this afternoon. Now, the rest of August looks like being a scorcher under sunnier skies, which could be the weather pattern through early September. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Those are the top stories at this hour here in Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session. Thank you for now.
히알루론산과 콜라겐의 진짜 만남, 히알루겐.
Different from a mixed complex, hyaluron performs itself as a single ingredient, which is light but fully dense. Hyaluron provides moisture and elasticity enhancement to skin at once. The total care to your skin concerns Hyaluron by Mizon.
Why do Korean people have such a good skin?
North Korea unveiled new suicide attack drones this past weekend as South Korea and the US engage in their annual joint exercise, which comes to an end this coming Thursday after 11 days of defense drills in air, on land and at sea. We have details in this edition of Issues and Insiders.
Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Issues and Insiders for August 27th here in South Korea. I'm Min San-hee. It's that time of the week yet again during which our panel of foreign correspondents touch upon a number of headlines here on the Korean Peninsula. For this, I have William Gallo, Seoul Bureau Chief for the American broadcaster VOA. William, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Nicholas Smith, Asia correspondent for British Daily, The Telegraph. Nicola, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Right. William, we'll start with you. Let's begin with details about North Korea's Kim Jong-un supervising, I believe, a test of suicide drones this past Saturday and perhaps their broader implications.
Yeah, so I mean, we don't have a lot of details about what was tested here, but we do have some pictures. They were blurred by North Korean state media to actually, hide some of the details. But it seems that we can conclude, based on the fact that they're called suicide drones, that these are drones that are not dropping payloads as much as they are just ramming into things and exploding. They don't seem super complex. For certain, South Korea and the United States have much more advanced drones than what North Korea was displaying here, but I don't think that's really the point. I think probably the lack of complexity might have been the point, actually. In fact, you see North Korea use these kinds of tools to conduct asymmetric kind of provocations, very notably a couple of years ago whenever there was a drone incursion across the border. So maybe the fact that they aren't so complex may actually be some advantage for North Korea in this case.
Right. And despite this open display, if I may, of defiance, quite a number of pundits here on the Korean Peninsula have said that the actual risks of a full-fledged war on the Korean Peninsula remain quite low. Now, speaking as a correspondent having covered events here in this part of the world, what are your thoughts regarding the prospects of warfare here?
I don't think the chances of all-out war are very high. I'm not only a journalist here, I have two small children here. And if I thought the chances of all-out war were high, well, then I'd probably have them move on. But no, I don't think that's the case at all. In fact, I think we're in a period where North Korea is actually reacting not as aggressively to certain events such as the South Korea-U.S. military exercises. We really haven't seen them sort of jump up and down and complain as much as they have. There are those who predict that maybe North Korea, ahead of the U.S. election, will conduct some type of provocation, maybe a nuclear test. But we've been saying that now for about 3 years, maybe, that North Korea is going to conduct a nuclear test. We really don't have an idea when that would happen.
Right, no, we don't. Nicola, while an actual war then, as William has pointed out, looks unlikely for the time being, a war of words, metaphorically speaking, of course, continues with North Korea condemning the U.S.'s planned sale of Apache helicopters to South Korea. Now, it's called South Korea, a vassal force, that is, and it referred to the U.S. as being recklessly provocative. Back in the U.S., Vice President Kamala Harris has referred to Kim Jong-un as a tyrant. All this being said, Nicola, what are your prospects with regard to tensions here on the Korean Peninsula under a possible Harris administration in the U.S.?
Okay, well, as you said, we did see in Kamala Harris's speech that some quite firm language. She said, we're not going to cozy up to tyrants and dictators like Kim Jong-un. She spoke very clearly about the struggle between democracy and tyranny, and that is following on from her visit in 2022 to the DMZ, where she denounced the Kim regime and, criticised rampant human rights violations and its unlawful weapons program. And at the same time, as you said, with the Democratic National Convention, we saw the North Koreans warning the US of consequences for selling its Apaches, also warning South Korea and the US against a reckless provocation. But really, this is the kind of language that we're very used to from North Korea. So I wouldn't read too much into that about their approach towards Kamala Harris. I think what we'll see under a possible Kamala Harris presidency is very similar to what we've seen under Joe Biden, that we'll see a sense of continuity, that she will stick to the firm goal of denuclearization, at the same time being open to talks anytime, anywhere with no preconditions. And I think she'll really double down on these relationships with South Korea, Japan, regional allies, and strengthen them. And I do think, though, that we will see the same kind of cycle that we've been seeing with North Korea building up its nuclear program, with firm rhetoric from the US and South Korean side, and kind of bellicose statements from North Korea. I don't anticipate any major military confrontation. But what we've seen under the Biden administration is that his policy haven't really shifted the dial on North Korea. I think at this stage, though, in global politics, no US president is going to shift the dial on North Korea. We're living in a very different world from the Trump presidency, even the start of the Biden presidency. Kim Jong-un has since said that he is keeping his nuclear weapons. And Russia has invaded Ukraine. It's now enabling North Korea at the UN Security Council, also with its weapons program. And Kim Jong-un is arguably listening more to China than he is to the US. So with these relationships between China, Russia, and North Korea strengthening, it's going to be very hard for anyone to get Kim Jong-un back to the table. And I do think that President Harris would be looking more at China in this region as a major foreign policy priority and the potential flashpoints over the South China Sea and Taiwan.
Right, and staying with possible scenarios, William, what look to be the implications of a potential Trump administration on tensions here on the Korean Peninsula?
It seems that Trump feels that he can just pick up where things left off with Kim Jong-un whenever Trump left office in 2021. He seems confident that Kim Jong-un would engage in talks, diplomacy would resume, and that he can manage the situation. I don't know, though. It doesn't seem for sure that Kim Jong-un would be quite as interested in diplomacy with the United States as he was in 2021. As Nikki pointed out, a lot has changed, and a lot has changed specifically with Russia. North Korea is now getting much of what it expected to get from those talks with Trump from Russia. Essentially, almost a way of getting around sanctions. There's more economic cooperation. Essentially, Russia and Putin has decided to basically look the other way when it comes to international sanctions on North Korea and provide a major boost for its economy. Those two things were major aspects of what Kim Jong-un expected to get from Trump. Also, I think Kim Jong-un feels a little bit burned from what happened at Hanoi whenever Trump walked away. I'm not saying, and I don't think many experts feel, that there's no chance that talks couldn't resume in some way. But sort of lest we forget, this was not just an easy on-ramp whenever Trump took office the first time to negotiations. It was quite rocky during that initial period. It seems possible that we could be looking at another rocky period if Trump were to win and North Korea were not to show an immediate interest in talks. But am I going to predict that? Not really. It just seems like it's not quite as certain, perhaps, as Trump makes it seem whenever he talks about North Korea in his speeches or in debates or things like that.
Right. Meanwhile, moving forward with regard to South Korea's foreign policy, Nicola, a summit that is expected between South Korea and Japan in early September. What issues may top talks between President Yoon Suk-yeol and his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida, especially as the latter is expected to end his term soon?
That's right. I think if those talks go ahead, one of the major talking points will be who will be Prime Minister Kishida's successor and how that will affect the dynamic of the relationship between Japan and South Korea. And I think they will really be looking at projecting very visibly how to keep up that momentum of this renewed relationship between South Korea and Japan, the warming of ties since they reached that political compromise over compensation for forced labour victims last year. And much of this rapprochement between Japan and South Korea has been driven by the personal rapport between President Yoon, Prime Minister Kishida and President Biden. So I think they'll really be discussing the bolts that actually keep greater security cooperation together, that transcends politics and who happens to be in government, because not only do we have Prime Minister Kishida standing down, but we also have the US election coming up, which will no doubt have an impact on this trilateral partnership that they have. So I'm sure that will be on the agenda, that they'll be keen to highlight the successes of what they have achieved so far, so what they've done through this trilateral security framework, the trilateral military drills, including the Freedom Edge drill that they had in June when you saw a US aircraft carrier alongside South Korean and Japanese ships and planes, and that really showed a widening of their war-fighting capabilities and their ability to work together across land, sea and air, and also cyber. And inevitably they'll be discussing regional security, North Korea's ties with Russia. I would expect something along the lines of economic cooperation, cultural cooperation. But most of all, I think they'll be wanting to get those optics right of how we move forward, even if Prime Minister Kishida is no longer there. And I think he will also want to be personally showing his legacy and promoting this as one of his diplomatic successes of his premiership.
Right, and speaking about staying with diplomacy, William, also in September, President Yoon is scheduled to visit the Czech Republic, and again, he's taking a large business delegation with him. That being said, how do you care to assess, perhaps, the Yoon administration's approach to economic security in the face of the current global, especially geopolitical uncertainty, that is?
Yeah, I think the big picture here is important. I think it's clear that the Yoon administration has prioritized this idea of economic security, that even it's elevated it right up near national security. In fact, that you cannot have national security without a very high degree of economic security. I think that's the main takeaway sort of from these types of interactions, which fits, this visit fits a broader pattern in that way. I think it's also important to look at this from the standpoint of the Yoon administration also sort of improving relations with like-minded countries, perhaps also focusing more on Europe at maybe an opportune moment. I know there's a lot of frustration, especially with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There's a lot of frustration with the role that China has sort of played in that. And this could be an opportunity to sort of further improve relations between South Korea and Europe. So those are sort of the two big lenses that I'm looking at that trip in terms of.
Right, and speaking about South Korea's relationships with Europe, the Slovak Prime Minister is scheduled to visit Korea in late September for nuclear power talks. What more can you tell us about this upcoming meeting?
That's right. Robert Fico is arriving in Seoul for these talks at the end of September to discuss potential plans to build a new nuclear power plant at an existing power plant in Slovakia. And the Slovak government has mentioned France and Korea as French and Korean companies as potential bidders for a new 1,200 megawatt unit. And so the Slovakian leader's visit will build on the foreign minister's visit. He was already here in May when the two countries discussed nuclear energy in the context of the wider Korean-Slovakian ties, and he was very complimentary about Korea's extensive experience in planning, construction and operating of nuclear power plants, and set the scene for further talks which are going to take place in September. And this also reflects a bigger focus of the Yoon presidency on nuclear energy. The government has an aim to provide 30% of domestic power through nuclear energy by 2030, and also to step up its exports in nuclear energy, with the goal of exporting 10 units of nuclear reactors by 2030 also. And we did see in July that Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power was selected as a preferred bidder to build 2 nuclear power units in the Czech Republic. And so that was heralded by the Industry Ministry as a bridgehead for South Korea to make further inroads into Europe. There is currently an intellectual property dispute over that particular deal, but it certainly was seen as progress for Korea to move more into the European sector of nuclear energy.
Right, indeed. And William, this is an impromptu question, but given the advances made by the Yoon administration with regard to its diplomacy and relationships with its partners overseas, how would you assess the Yoon administration's objective of becoming a global pivotal state thus far?
I think that they've shown that they are willing to prioritize foreign policy. It seems like a consistent focus of the Yoon administration. Maybe that's in part because of sort of the domestic limitations involved in sort of the way that the South Korean politics is structured. I think he has a little bit more leeway to make decisions in terms of foreign policy than here at home, where the National Assembly is, of course, dominated by the Minju Party. But that said, it seems that there is a real shift in South Korea under the Yoon administration to become more relevant globally, in the region and globally. And I think that that is unquestionably a success for the Yoon administration. Not that there aren't challenges in some ways to that, and some inconsistencies. Every country has inconsistencies whenever they're trying to especially pursue something that is referred to sort of as a values-based diplomacy or foreign policy. But overall, you can see how South Korea has sort of been welcomed to play these bigger roles on the global stage in the Yoon administrations. It seems like a very popular initiative overseas, and many people would see it as unquestionably a success.
Do you suppose the administration's strategic clarity over strategic ambiguity has served it well on the diplomatic stage?
Yes. I mean, there are still questions about what that means for relations with China, for instance, especially. I mean, I think that looking ahead, we can't expect South Korea to just go in one direction as it relates to China and just be like, no, we're gonna stand up to China, we're gonna preserve values. There are other factors to consider. There are economic factors to consider. Everyone knows this. Everyone realizes this. So moving ahead, I do think you'll continue to see this focus. Again, maybe it won't be linear. Maybe it won't be only one direction because the world is complex. But in general, I think that, yes, there has been much less of strategic ambiguity, even if South Korea under Yoon hasn't fully 100% now, chosen sides with the United States and is just totally disregarding China. There still is much more of a direction it's headed here, and that's clear as opposed to ambiguous, as you say.
Right. Meanwhile, William, we have some time left. I'm going to ask you about a recent coverage that you yourself did. You wrote about North Korean defectors launching a site to share the untold stories of North Korea. Could you tell us a bit about your coverage?
Yeah, so this was a story. Obviously, we come back to this defector story quite often as foreign correspondents here. It's a very interesting community. So many interesting stories to be told. This one I thought was particularly interesting. It was a project begun by a defector who came to South Korea in 2012, and he realized that a lot of people, especially in the global discourse, are talking about North Korea, but it's not so often that North Koreans are the ones talking about that and sort of shaping the global narrative. So with the help of the Human Rights Foundation, which is a US-based human rights group, they started a sort of a news website earlier this year called Enk Insider, and it's sort of a chance for North Korean defectors to have a platform to be able to talk about their country. And sometimes that involves hard reporting, with contacts and undercover sources in North Korea. Other times it's just to give a voice about what's happening in North Korea, to have them comment about policy decisions, cultural critiques, things like this. And it's a chance to give North Koreans a voice through defectors. It's a small website. There's only about 8 staff or so. But I think it's important, and that there are people, even some who have recently come to South Korea from the north. I talked specifically to a man who came here in 2022 from basically, it was very close to forced labor at a construction site in Russia. He fled. He came here, and now he's a journalist writing basically whatever he wants about the North Korean government, whereas just 2 years ago, he was more or less in North Korean custody. So that was, I thought, an important story, especially since there are so few defectors coming over across the border now.
Right, and staying with defectors, Nicola, you covered North Korean defections into South Korea, and this month alone, there were 2 defections by North Koreans made on foot into this part of the peninsula, of course. Now, some say that Seoul's loudspeaker broadcasts in recent times have perhaps prompted these defections. What are your thoughts?
It's really hard to say what prompts someone to make such a risky journey. We don't know anything about these 2 defections that you've mentioned over the past month, other than the very basic facts. And we're unlikely to really know for some time now, because, very often, North Korean defectors have to go through certain programs to help them integrate into South Korean society. So it's very hard to speak openly about these things. But South Korea has expanded its loudspeaker propaganda broadcasts in retaliation for the trash balloons that have been sent over from the north. And from what we know, some of these are fixed, some of these are mobiles. They have been broadcasting messages for up to 10 hours a day, and using a Voice of Freedom program, which projects psychological warfare into the north. So you're talking about messages against the regime, criticism of the succession of the Kim dynasty, the advantages of capitalism. There were also broadcasts about the high-profile North Korean diplomat who fled from Cuba last year, and about how he has made it safely to the south. You have K-pop broadcasts. We just don't know how influential these broadcasts are. Defections have continued with or without the broadcast. So they may make a difference to some individuals. What we have seen over the past few years is a sharp decline of defections, but that has largely been because of COVID, because of pandemic restrictions and extremely tight borders, and also an increase in surveillance not only on the borders but also in China, which is one of the most popular routes for North Korean defectors to escape through, and it's become incredibly difficult for them to cross through China without being caught and detained by the Chinese authorities and then sent back. So obviously for everyone who leaves North Korea, there's a huge calculation of the risk of, whether they will be able to survive that journey, of what happens to their family. So it would be very interesting to speak to these defectors and ask them if these broadcasts made a difference. But I think there are many factors involved.
All right, there's so many questions and so few answers on that front then.
Yeah.
All right, Nicola, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
And William, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for being with us.
AI is all around us. The military domain is no exception. Responsible AI in the military domain. Re-aim. It is not the technology that defines our future. It is how we use it. Responsible AI for